Namaste, good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all of us joining here on this wonderful episode of Green Chat. Today, we are going to talk about decarbonizing the transportation sector, part A, right? So, like in episodes 4, 5, and 6, we talked about decarbonizing the energy sector. This time in episode 7, 8, and hopefully 9 as well, we will talk about decarbonizing transportation sector. So in today's segment, we're going to talk about the key drivers, no pun intended, by the way, right? We're going to run through it, and Hiran, as usual, is going to lead that effort and run through each of the scenarios, what is happening on transportation sector in terms of both energy consumption, carbon footprint, particulate counts, etc., etc., etc. So over to you, Hiran. Go ahead.
Thank you, Max. Welcome to this episode of Green Chat. So, as Max mentioned, we will delve into various aspects of the transportation sector.
So let me begin with a question before I give it over to you, Hiran. So let's start with first. I think the goal for today's episode should be first an overview of the transportation industry. Let's go ahead and give that overview first. Go ahead, Hiran.
Thank you, Max. The transportation sector is broadly divided into passenger transport and freight transport. Passenger transport modes are all familiar to us, from air travel to road, rail, and maritime. So if you're taking a cruise, of course, that's related to maritime. All the flights we take back and forth from different parts of the world is related to air. Everything from walking to cars to your taxis or buses, they come under road transportation. And intercity or your subway system, metro system, all of these belong to the rail transport. Similarly, for the freight mode, we do transport a lot of goods from one place to another, from air, using air transport or trucks of different sizes. Our railroads in India contribute a lot to moving things from one end of the country to another. Maritime can be both, your major ships, big ships that travel across the oceans, to inland and smaller vehicles that fly through your rivers and sea closer to the land. In addition to that, we also move things through pipelines. We're all familiar with water that comes in our tap, that's municipal pipelines. Oil and gas are also transferred from one location to another using pipelines. If we look at the transportation sector, each of these different modes for moving goods require different kinds of infrastructure. These can be your navigation channels and terminals for your big barges that move inland, to ports that are needed to take on the ships that are coming in between different countries, to airports, your road infrastructure for that allows you to have these heavy trucks fly from one place to another. And all of this infrastructure is very expensive to build and maintain. Similarly, each of these vehicles have different tonnage or different capacities of how much they can transport at one time. For example, if you take a big ship, it can transport up to 300,000 tons of oil, for example, 2 million barrels of oil at one time. To smaller light commercial vehicles that we see doing our our big basket and Amazon deliveries on a daily basis. Then you have, and the time it takes to transport goods across from one point to another through these different modes of transportation also varies. So putting it all together, if we look at the cost of transportation, we are looking at lower costs for road transportation for shorter distances. So maybe within the city transportation, or from city to city, nearby cities or towns. Those kind of transportation is efficiently done using road. But for longer distances, like cross country or from one part, like from the west to east coast of the country, then you would need rail transportation, which is more efficient in terms of cost. And for even longer distances, so between countries, so for example, if you want to ship something from India to Mexico or to Africa to European countries, all of this can happen most efficiently in terms of cost using your shipping and maritime industry.
Okay, so great. So we saw the first overview of overall what does the transportation industry entail, what are the types of modes of transport. For those people who aren't even familiar with what is happening in the transportation sector, that was very good. For those of us who are still saying, "Hey, what the hell? I knew this already." Hang on, guys. There's more coming. Okay, so let's now focus on the energy use profile for the transportation industry. How is the energy use? How do you profile the energy use in the transportation industry, Hiran?
Yeah, today most of the energy that's used for transportation sector comes from fossil fuels. It accounts for 29% of the final energy consumption. And if we remember from episode 4, we said 22%, that's based on the 2005 numbers. So the energy used by transportation has actually gone up. And not only that, more than 95% of it is still non-renewable energy, pretty much all fossil fuel.
Wow. So my question was on this 96.3% non-renewable energy, right? And I mean, this clearly warrants for more, electric or sort of renewable options for energy for transportation, because and it accounts for now 29%, not 22%, like in 2005. So now we're building the case for why other options need to be considered. Right now we're still at what, 3.7% renewable, uh, you know out of which 3.4 is all biofuels, and very few 0.3% is renewable electricity, right? So that transition is what we are in the middle of, and it's almost hilarious to look at that 20-year transition that happened, you know when we moved away from horses to motor vehicles, right? And the primary driver was the pollution caused by the horses, and the manure that comes out of them, right? So now we're facing the exact same scenario for the fuels and their emissions that we have been consuming for a long time, and the death or demise of the fossil fuels is on its way, and it might happen as fast as what happened to the horses. Let's run through the scenarios here.
Right. So if we kind of double click on the fossil fuel consumption and look at where it is going, 89% of that is used for road transportation, and air accounts for about 7%, and very little for the rest. And even within the road transportation, 59% of it is used for just moving people. So passenger transport accounts for, these are private vehicles, they account for 59% of the energy we consume for road transportation. The other big chunk is your freight. And if you look at the global numbers, motorcycles account for only 1%, very small percentage in terms of energy.
And I think that's a global data, right? 1% is a global data, whereas in India, the number is quite different. Two-wheelers account for 70% of all vehicles in India, right? And they account for 20% of CO2 emissions, or 30% of particulate emissions in India. We'll come to the emissions later, but that's the data for two-wheelers in India, and why so much focus is on two-wheelers right now. And also, two-wheelers account for 60% of annual vehicular fossil fuel consumption from 2016 to 2019. This is for India. Even though the problem in terms of energy utilization is only at 1% level globally, in an Indian context, these are bigger problems. That's the only point I'm making. Go ahead.
Right, certainly. And not only that, we're using so much energy, and only 32% of it is actually converted to kinetic energy to move things. And more than 60% is lost, either in heat or, in all kinds of emissions that are not generating useful energy.
That's kind of crazy, right? I mean, imagine, when we used to walk or take the horse vehicles, I think the energy efficiency there is almost nearly 100%. Mechanical energy to mechanical energy, it doesn't require any conversion. Whereas all these fuels that go through conversions, I'm not even going back to how the fuel was produced, the energy efficiency and inefficiencies in that. just from the fuel, the potential energy stored in the fuel to what converts to mechanical energy, we are losing 68%.
Yes, and that's a big chunk. And this is what we need to improve if we need to reduce the energy consumption globally.
Yeah, we'll get to the improvement portion in the next episode. Obviously, we're going to run through the scenarios of efficiency of each of these and what's being done to improve that in episode 8. But let's run through 7 first. Run through it. So now we talked about the energy piece, consumption and efficiency and all of that. I think we should now quickly delve into the GHG emissions and any other externalities, especially if we can put a cost number to it. That'll be great. Hiran. Go for it.
Sure, Max. So if we look at the global CO2 emissions and the contribution of transportation there, 24% of it, of the global CO2 emissions come from transportation. And within that, more than 70% is from, again, road transport. So road transport is a biggest contributor for GHG emissions, especially CO2 emissions. The other big contributors are your aviation and shipping industry. And this contribution, I mean, the total contribution of transportation to GHG emissions has been going up at roughly about 2% since 1990. And the contribution of road transport is proportionally increasing, which is now at about 69%, which is a big chunk. Not only that, I mean, yes, GHG emissions are one thing, but there are other negative externalities due to transportation. Most of us in India are familiar with the number of accidents that happen on the roads, and accidents by car or motorcycle is a heavy burden, economic burden. The particulate matters that emit from your tires, from the fuel that we use, and all of that are the second largest contributor. And in addition to the PM 2.5, you also have these, other volatile organics coming out, and your NOx and SOx and all of this, which are leading to, lower atmospheric ozone formation. And this contributes to raising temperatures locally. Okay, so we have the GHG emissions that lead to your climate change directly, but there are all these other things that are happening, accidents, particulate matters, and all of this, that are also very expensive. Not only are they expensive, there is a heavy human cost to it. Between 2010 and 2015, the PM 2.5 and this ozone forming chemicals have led to nearly 400,000 deaths. And the pollution has caused like 7.8 million years of life loss and 1 trillion in health damages. And that's a global number. And I mean, anybody who lives in Delhi, in India, knows the cost of air pollution to human health and the way of life and everything that we have to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, see, these costs and the mortality piece especially, right? How do you put a number to it? And obviously they're not included in your vehicle cost. So if we start including the negative externalities to the vehicle cost and the fuel cost and all of that, we wouldn't be able to use those fuels.
Right. To kind of refer back to the earlier discussion about how people make choices about transportation, it's mainly based on speed, the capacity of the vehicles, and the distances, right? And there is no cost related to all these GHG emissions or the human impact of the externalities. And without that, we are making the wrong choices all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, we got into it. Yes, I understand. But now that we know the other externalities, we should be able to put a cost to it and add that to the mode of transportation's cost. That way, we actually address these challenges effectively. So now let's look at, okay, we've seen all these externalities. We've seen the inefficiency in the fuel consumption and fuel to energy ratio, output energy ratio, etc. Now, how do we address these challenges?
Right. So there are various scenarios developed by different agencies, but let me show you one to just give a feel for what we are trying to do. The ICCT came up with this a report in 2020, where they used the baseline carbon emissions from 2020 and then projected what would it be by 2050 based on the growth of these different vehicles. And what they found is that by 2050, if we leave it like as it is, then we are going to go about, about 20,000 million metric tons by 2050. And we are now around, between around 12,000 million tons. So there is, and already we are seeing the impacts of, the transportation sector, right? So what we need to do, and the scenario they have described, is that there are two main things we have to do. One is invest in zero emission vehicle technologies. And we will be talking a lot more about it in our episode 8 as to what those improvements are and how we are doing it. And the other piece, which is in many contexts a low-hanging piece, is your efficiency and emission improvements. And even easier things to do are compliance improvements. Because if we even try to implement the compliance requirements we have placed and impose strict penalties, that contributes to reducing your GHG emissions, CO2 emissions, right?
But it looks like your zero emission vehicle improvement and the energy efficiency improvements are roughly the same order of impact, more or less.
Yeah, it varies depending on the sector. For LDV, your light transport vehicles, definitely the zero emission vehicles are your biggest chunk. In other sectors, like your heavy trucks and heavy vehicles, they are about the same. It changes depending on which sector you're looking at.
Yep.
So let's talk about these two. Touch upon it. We'll go into details in future episodes.
Sure. Now let's talk about how do we move towards net zero and, your improvement of energy efficiency, right? Improvement of all these efficiencies.
So for zero emission efficiency, we have primarily three choices of technologies. One is around using electric vehicles, which is now already in the market for certain segments. Then you have the hydrogen fuel cell based vehicles, again available for passenger cars now. And experiments are going on in other kinds of transportation. Or you can use advanced combustion engine technologies. And we will discuss all of this in our next episode. Apart from this, we can look at the energy efficiency piece. And the way to look at energy efficiency, at least in the road transportation sector, is to use the avoid, shift, and improve framework. The avoid bit is about designing our cities better, our towns better, so that we don't have to actually travel by any mode of transportation. And everything is available, within your community and so on. So that's your smart city kind of structures. The other one is shifting your travel efficiencies.
Yeah, and if you must travel, I think we should look at more optimal modes of travel for each travel. And then while you're using the vehicle, you're saying that, hey, there are continuous improvements in the vehicle efficiency itself being made. Right. Great. So I think we have come to a logical end of this episode of episode 7, where we just basically scraped the surface of the transportation sector. We talked about the energy consumption, energy efficiency, the greenhouse gas, and mortalities, and several other external negative externalities. What some of the challenges were? How do we move forward towards net zero? What options are starting to get available now from a market perspective? And we'll delve much more deeper into it in episode 8 and 9. Thank you very much for your time, and do take a look at our previous episodes on energy, and before that the introduction sections, etc. And do fill out the feedback form provided for each of those episodes. Thank you very much.